In 2012, a Minecraft player named Steve logged onto the game. He was a regular guy looking to upgrade his base. His goal was to just get more diamonds for some tools. So he went to a nearby cave. But Minecraft's a big place. It's actually infinite. You can go in any direction forever, and you could create any sort of world you want, which means some worlds might be different than others. Steve walked into the nearby cave. He scanned the walls and found ore, gravel, stone, and typical stuff. But something caught his eye. He noticed what looked like giant footsteps in the floor below him carved into the stone. Now, Steve thought this was odd since he'd never seen anything like this before, but he put that thought behind him. Still, he thought it was weird, and a few minutes later of strip mining, he'd find out why. You see, Minecraft Steve, the original character in the Minecraft games, was simply playing the world one day. And he loved exploring the world, walking around, going in caves to find things like treasures and ores, kind of like all of us. But nothing prepared him for what he found in the very first cave he ever went into. This took place when Minecraft was still a beta. And when he entered inside the cave, he found something so strange, it sent chills down his spine. It was just a regular expedition. He'd spotted everything that was normal so far. Rocks on the walls, coal here, maybe a little spider crawling up over there. Nothing too weird. And this wasn't his first time spelunking either. He'd been in caves before. He'd been in tight spaces. He'd been in eerie little canals. He'd been here. He knew what he was doing. But this cave was different. It was the biggest cave he'd ever seen. And it was stretching like a canyon underground. The ceilings were so high, they disappeared into the cave shadows. And as he explored, he noticed something odd. Massive footprints embedded into the stone. These weren't ordinary footprints. They were huge, far larger than anything in the Minecraft world. Even the Ender Dragon wasn't capable of this. They were so big, he could fit inside of the big toe. As anyone would do in this situation, Steve started following the trail of footprints. He was intrigued, he was cautious, he played it safe. And as he walked deeper into the cavern, lighting his way with torches, the air started to get colder. The walls began to show signs of some ancient carvings, and he knew he'd reached somewhere that no one had ever been in Minecraft. The carvings were illustrating these towering figures. They looked like giants, standing over villages, forests, mountains. But the scary thing is that these giants, they held giant weapons, and their faces were very angry. The more Steve saw, and the more he started to walk down this cave, the more he started to feel a little uneasy. The carvings showed giants destroying literally everything in their path, from cities, to compounds, to builds, to anything you could think of. They were crushing homes, they were tearing down trees, they were literally using their hands to rip cities out of the ground and crush them in these paintings. But then he noticed something even more unusual. The giants' eyes were empty. It was as if they'd had no soul. It was very eerie, very uncanny. It left Steve feeling a serious sense of unease. Now, as Steve explored this cave, he looked around every corner, lifted every single rock, and looked underneath it, and suddenly he found an aged and brittle scroll hidden behind a small pile of rocks. Now, the scroll was partially decayed, it was ripped and shredded, and it felt like it was crumbling to dust, but some parts of it were still legible. It talked about a time when giants ruled the land. They used their immense power, strength, and size to control everything they wanted, and they were brutal and cruel to everybody involved. But the scroll also hinted about their downfall. It mentioned a catastrophe led to their extinction, but the details were lost to time. Or in this case, the details were lost because the scroll ended there. There was a tear at the bottom of the scroll, and he couldn't read anymore. Somehow there were giants, and somehow they went extinct, and maybe some of you guys have played the world in Minecraft and noticed what appear to be giants' footsteps. I know I have. I thought it was a weird glitch in the world or how they rendered, but as Steve began to leave, a deep rumble echoed in the cave. This was a low resonant sound, and it seemed like it was the earth itself growling, and it got louder every second that passed. The more time that went on, the more the ground below him started trembling. It felt like the walls were alive, and that's because they were. Steve was in the throat of a giant. I'm just kidding, that's not true. He did feel a chill run down his spine. Something was waking up. As the rumbling grew louder, the cave began to shake violently. The walls started shaking, rocks were tumbling from the ceiling, and the ground beneath Steve's feet was shifting. He knew he had to get out, but the entrance? It was blocked by fallen stones. Now, panic started to set in at this point as he realized he was trapped, and the shaking grew more intense. There was no way for him to leave this cave, and the roar was getting so loud, it was deafening. Steve's torch flickered. Its light was struggling against the darkness. The cave was getting darker every second. There was no more light peeking in, every exit was closed off, and then from the shadows, a giant hand burst right through the stone. It was massive, its fingers were thick, they looked like tree trunks, and the hand reached out, clawing at the air as if it was reaching for something. It was a sight that filled Steve with terror. Now, this hand of course, belonged to a giant. A creature that, according to this document that he found, should have been extinct, but it was waking up right here, breaking through the stone as if it was never buried. So Steve did what anyone would do in that position. He ducked behind a fallen pillar, watching in horror as the hand moved and its grip crushed everything in its path, from stones to rock to more stones. Now at this point, Steve knew he was in danger, all right? He had to stop the giant from awakening. He had to make sure that he could get out safely, but he had no idea how to do any of this. And the scroll mentioned some sort of catastrophe before it was cut off that led to their extinction, but the details were missing. The only clue he had were carvings that deciphered some sort of hero, a figure that was cloaked in light, holding some sort of a sword that could kill giants. What even could that be? He had no idea. But he had to find this weapon. This was the only thing that could stop the giant from emerging and wreaking havoc among all Minecraft worlds, including yours. So he started following the carvings and he started looking for something that would lead to the hero's resting place. The carvings told some story of a great battle where the hero fought against these giants. The final carving, though, showed the hero sealing the giants away, trapping them in a deep slumber. As he ventured deeper into the cave, the rumbling started to grow louder and the giant's hand became more aggressive, tearing through the stone with growing ferocity. Steve knew he was running out of time. He needed to find the resting place of where this weapon was before this giant and the others fully awakened. So Steve started looking and he noticed there appeared to be some sort of a hidden passage behind one of the carvings. It led to a small chamber. It was a very tight space. It had very sharp rocks everywhere on the walls and the ceiling looked like it was going to collapse. But Steve pressed on, driven by the urgency of the giant's awakening. The passage led him to an ancient tomb where the hero should have been buried. And inside the tomb, the hero was there all right. Steve found the hero's remains, a skeleton that was wrapped in some decaying away robes. But more importantly, he found the weapon. The glowing sword that was used to strike down the giants previously. The hilt was covered in runes, something that he'd never seen in Minecraft before. The blade seemed to shine with a light, almost as if it was made of glowstone. It was the only thing, according to legends, that could stop the giants from emerging. Steve picked the sword up, and he knew if he didn't act quickly right now, the entire world would be doomed. The ground started shaking beneath his feet more than it's ever shook, and the giant's body continued to break through the stone. The chamber started to collapse. Steve had to get back to the main cavern to seal the giant away. He raced through the narrow passage where the ground started shaking more and more with every step. As he entered the main cavern, he saw that the giant was nearly free. Its massive form was emerging from the stone below, and each movement caused the ground to shake. The giant's eyes were still empty, but his presence filled the air with dread. It let out a deafening roar, the first time Steve had heard this creature make a sound, and it was so loud, it reverberated through the cave and rocks started falling more off the edges. Steve knew he had to use the sword to drive it through the giant's back in order to send it back into his slumber. He raised the blade and struck the giant's hand, swinging and slicing through the stone and bone with ease. The giant roared in pain. The giant's massive fingers recoiled with the strike, but it wasn't enough. The giant was still emerging and its rage was still growing. Steve swung the sword again, aiming this time for the wrist. The blade cut deeper this time, causing the giant to flinch, and this time it retreated a little bit, but it still wasn't enough. The giant was determined to break free. Its movements became even more aggressive. The fight was becoming intense with Steve dodging falling rocks, avoiding the giant's massive swings, and he knew if he didn't strike the right spots, the giant would never go back into the stone. Every blow seemed to have the same effect, cause the giant to weaken and retreat, and then he would come right back. It was never enough to get him all the way in. Then Steve started to remember. One of the runes he saw on the chamber's walls, they were the same runes that the hero used to seal the giants away years ago. He knew he had to activate them to close the chamber and to trap the giant once more. So using the sword, he grabbed the runes on the hilt one by one, each of them activated, causing the chamber to shake violently. At this point, the noise in the chamber started to grow louder. The ground started shaking. People above thought an earthquake was happening. The intensity was absolutely off the charts as the runes started to activate. The giant roared in fury. Its body was trembling as it was forced back down into the stone. With one final strike, Steve activated the last rune, causing the entire chamber to collapse. Dust and debris filled the air, and Steve barely made it out alive before he sealed it shut completely. He stumbled into the sunlight, gasping for air. He'd stopped the giant from emerging, but he knew the danger wasn't over. The sword was powerful, but it was only a temporary solution, because if anybody ever disturbed that cave again, the giants might return. The story of the giants became a legend in Minecraft lore, and it was told around the world. Steve knew the world was safe, but he also knew that something ancient and powerful still lurked below the earth, waiting for a chance to rise again. Steve decided to keep the sword in case it was needed again, but that means if you stumble upon the cave full of giants, the sword won't be there to save you.